The old house stood at the end of a narrow, winding street, shrouded in the kind of mist that seemed to cling to secrets long buried. It was my grandmother's home, a place I had visited countless times as a child. But now, as I crossed the threshold into the dusty foyer, it felt different. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and musty memories, and I could almost hear the echoes of laughter that had once filled these rooms. But there was another sound too, a whisper of unease that seemed to follow me as I moved deeper into the house. "Mark, be careful up there," my mother called from the kitchen, where she was preparing a pot of her famous chicken soup. "That attic hasn't been touched in years." "I will, Mom," I shouted back, trying to inject some humor into my response. "I might find treasure." I chuckled to myself, but the laughter faded as I climbed the creaky staircase leading to the attic. As a child, I had always been fascinated by the treasures hidden away in the attic, each box a potential trove of stories waiting to be uncovered. The attic was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, its weak glow barely penetrating the shadows. Dust motes danced in the light, and I could see cobwebs clinging to the rafters. I took a deep breath, savoring the smell of old paper and wood, and began to sift through the chaos of forgotten belongings. There were old trunks, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and boxes filled with trinkets that had long lost their meaning. Each object I touched seemed to pulse with its own history, a fragment of my family's past. After a while, I came across a large, ornate frame leaning against the wall. Curiosity piqued. I wiped away the dust with the sleeve of my sweatshirt and found a portrait of a man. My heart raced as I stared into the face of the painting. He looked strikingly familiar, his features a mirror of my own, but it was the expression on his face that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were wide with terror, as if he had just witnessed something horrifying, and his mouth was slightly agape, frozen in a silent scream. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, feeling an inexplicable chill creep up my spine. I reached out to touch the frame, feeling the cool wood beneath my fingers. "Who are you?" I whispered, as if the portrait could hear me. For a moment, I felt a strange connection to this man, as if he were trying to convey a message beyond the canvas. Suddenly, an unsettling thought flashed through my mind. Was this man an ancestor? The resemblance was uncanny. I pulled the portrait closer, studying it intently. The clothing was dated, suggesting it was painted many decades ago. I could almost feel the weight of his gaze pressing upon me, urging me to uncover the truth hidden behind those painted eyes. "Mark, are you okay up there?" My mother's voice cut through the silence, snapping me out of my reverie. "Yeah, I'm fine," I called back, but my voice felt distant, as if I were still grappling with the image before me. The portrait seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost alive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man's story than met the eye. I carefully placed the portrait back against the wall and decided I needed to learn more about my family history. The feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach was unsettling, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. I made my way back downstairs, where my mother was stirring the soup. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you know anything about our family history? Like, who lived here before Grandma?" She paused, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, honey, there's a lot of history in this house. Your great-grandparents lived here, and I think your great-great-grandparents too. It's been in the family for generations." "Really? Do you have any old photos or diaries?" I asked, my interest piqued. "Somewhere in the attic, I'm sure, but be careful. There are things up there that might be unsettling." Her tone was serious, and I could tell she didn't want to delve too deeply into whatever shadows lingered in our family's past. "Unsettling? Like what?" I pressed, feeling a mix of intrigue and dread. "Just stories, Mark. Stories that your grandmother used to tell, about how some things are better left undisturbed." She turned her attention back to the soup, but I could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. I decided then and there that I would dig deeper into my family's history. I spent the rest of the afternoon helping my mom in the kitchen, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed by the portrait and the mystery surrounding it. After dinner, I excused myself and grabbed my jacket, heading back to the attic. The atmosphere was different now, heavier. I could still feel the echoes of the past swirling around me as I rummaged through boxes, searching for anything that might shed light on my ancestors. I stumbled upon an old, tattered journal bound in cracked leather. It was filled with scrawled handwriting, and I felt a thrill of excitement. I carefully opened the journal, revealing pages of faded ink. The entries were written by my great-grandmother, detailing her daily life, but as I read further, I noticed the tone shifted. The later entries were frantic, filled with ramblings about shadows in the night, whispers in the walls, and an entity that haunted her dreams. "Mark, is everything all right?" My mother's voice startled me again. "Yeah, just finding some old stuff," I replied, trying to mask my unease. "Be careful," she warned again, her voice laced with concern. "Some things are better left alone." As I continued to read the journal, I felt a growing sense of urgency. The last entry was dated just days before my great-grandmother passed away. "I hear it at night," she wrote. "It calls to me. I must warn my children, my grandchildren. The darkness feeds on fear. It is coming for us." The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I closed the journal with trembling hands. I needed to know more. I couldn't shake the feeling that the portrait, the journal, and the warnings were all connected. It was almost as if the past was reaching out to me, urging me to uncover the truth. "Mark!" My mother shouted from the bottom of the stairs, pulling me from my thoughts. "It's getting late. You should come down." "Okay, I'm coming," I called back, reluctantly leaving the attic behind. But the image of the man in the portrait, his terrified expression, lingered in my mind. What had happened in my family's past? Why did it feel like I was standing on the precipice of something dark and dangerous? That night, as I lay in bed, the journal's words echoed in my thoughts. I tossed and turned, unable to find solace. Shadows danced on the walls, and I could have sworn I heard whispers, soft and insistent, calling my name. "Mark, Mark." I bolted upright, my heart racing. "What is happening?" I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the fear that clung to me like a heavy blanket. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to find out what had happened before it consumed me. The next day, I returned to the attic and pored over the items I had found. I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I sought were buried somewhere within these walls. I spent hours digging through boxes, piecing together fragments of my family's history. Each item I uncovered seemed to resonate with a strange energy. A locket here, a piece of jewelry there, but nothing that explained the terror captured in the portrait. Frustrated, I finally decided to confront my mother about what I had discovered. "Mom," I called as I descended the stairs. "We need to talk. I found something in the attic." She looked up from the living room, her brow furrowing. "What did you find?" "I found a portrait of someone who looks just like me, but his expression is terrifying. And I found a journal from great-grandma that talks about some dark entity haunting our family." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves before continuing. "What's going on? Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" Her expression shifted, a mixture of fear and sadness washing over her. "Mark, please. There are things in our family history that are best left forgotten. I thought you should stay away from it." "Stay away?" I echoed incredulously. "How can I stay away when it feels like it's reaching out to me? I need to know the truth." She sighed heavily, her gaze drifting to the window, as if searching for an answer in the distance. "There are things you don't understand. Our family has faced darkness, and it has taken its toll. I wanted to protect you from that." "Protect me?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "But don't you see? Ignoring it won't make it go away. I have to understand what happened. Sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lies we tell ourselves," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the only way to move forward was to confront the shadows of my family's past. "I'm going to find out what happened," I declared, as I stepped into the dimly lit library. The musty smell of old books enveloped me like a thick fog, My heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation. I was there to uncover the secrets of my family, diving into the tangled web of our history that had long been obscured by time. After finding that portrait of my ancestor in my grandmother's attic, the one whose gaze seemed to pierce through the veil of generations, I felt an irresistible pull to learn more. The uncanny resemblance between us had ignited a fire of curiosity within me. I settled into a corner table, surrounded by towering shelves filled with forgotten tomes. My fingers brushed over the spines, searching for something meaningful. As I flipped through a few dusty books, I stumbled upon a collection of diaries belonging to my great-grandmother. The cover was worn and the pages yellowed, but something about it felt significant. I opened it cautiously, as if I were about to uncover a hidden treasure. The entries were written in a delicate script, detailing the mundane aspects of life in the past. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. My heart sank as I read about strange rituals and a shadowy entity that haunted our lineage. The darkness follows us. One entry read, "It feeds on our fears and thrives on our tragedies." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Was it possible that the entity mentioned was somehow linked to the terror I saw reflected in my ancestors' eyes? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no mere coincidence. I read on, my pulse quickening with every line. The diary spoke of the entity as if it were a living thing, a presence that had tormented my family for generations. It thrived on our pain, growing stronger with each tragedy. I flipped to another page, desperate for answers. To banish the darkness, one must confront it. The words echoed in my mind, but the diary offered no guidance on how to do that. My determination faltered as dread settled in my stomach. "Mark?" A voice jolted me from my thoughts. It was Mrs. Evans, the librarian, peering over my shoulder. "You've been here for quite some time. Everything okay?" "Just researching my family history," I replied, trying to sound casual despite the turmoil inside me. She nodded knowingly. "Many have come here seeking the same. Just be careful. Sometimes the past doesn't want to be disturbed." Her warning hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I thanked her, but her words only fueled my resolve. I had to know more. After hours of reading, I closed the diary with a sense of urgency. I felt a strange compulsion to share my findings, to seek help from someone who might understand the supernatural elements I had stumbled upon. Sarah came to mind. She had always been more attuned to the otherworldly, often talking about her dreams and the strange sensations she felt around certain objects. I left the library, the weight of the diaries pressing down on me. The sunlight felt dimmer as I walked towards the cafe where I usually met Sarah. The world around me blurred, and my thoughts raced with each step. What if the entity was already aware of my digging? What if it was coming for me? The cafe was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chill that lingered in my bones. I spotted Sarah at our usual table, her vibrant hair catching the light. She looked up as I approached, a smile fading as she noticed the grim expression on my face. "Mark, what's wrong?" she asked, concern etching her features. "I found something," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Diaries from my great-grandmother. They mention an entity that has been haunting my family for generations. Feeds on our fears, Sarah. It's linked to us." Her eyes widened, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "That sounds serious. Do you think it has anything to do with that portrait?" I can't shake the feeling that it does. The diary didn't say how to get rid of it, but it mentioned confronting it. "I thought you might have some insight," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. "I've felt something off lately," Sarah admitted, her gaze drifting to the window. "Ever since you started digging into your past, I've sensed a negative presence. It's like something is watching us." "Watching us," I echoed, my heart racing again. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it. It's like an energy that's been lingering, heavy and suffocating. I thought it was just my imagination, but now I'm not so sure." We fell silent, the weight of our conversation settling between us. I could feel the chill creeping back, the air thick with unspoken fears. Do you think we should try to communicate with it? I suggested hesitantly. Maybe we can find out what it wants. I have a crystal that might help, Sarah said, her voice firming up. It's meant for connecting with spirits. If we can reach out, we might learn more. Let's do it, I agreed, feeling the urgency of our situation. But we need to be careful. I don't want to provoke it. That night, we gathered at my house, the air heavy with anticipation. Sarah held the crystal in her hands, its surface shimmering under the light. Close your eyes and focus, she instructed, her voice steady. We need to invite any spirits that wish to communicate. As we sat in silence, I could feel the temperature drop around us. It was as if the very air was charged with electricity. Sarah's eyes fluttered beneath her eyelids, and I could see the tension in her body. I'm trying to reach out, she whispered. If there's anyone here, please reveal yourself. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the room, rattling the windows. The crystal in Sarah's hands glowed faintly, and she gasped, her eyes flying open. Mark, I felt something. Before she could elaborate, a wave of energy surged through the room, and Sarah collapsed to the floor, the crystal slipping from her fingers. Panic surged through me as I rushed to her side. Sarah, wake up. I shook her gently, fear clawing at my throat. When she finally stirred, her eyes were wide with terror. It was so strong, she stammered, struggling to sit up. It felt like a storm, Mark. We need to act quickly. The entity is close. It knows we're trying to reach it. Do you think it's coming for us? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Yes, she replied, her voice trembling. And we need to prepare ourselves. If it's been feeding on our family's fear for generations, it's not going to let us go easily. I felt a chill run down my spine as Sarah's words sank in. The weight of our discovery pressed heavily on my shoulders, but I knew we had to take action before it was too late. The smell of aged wood and dust filled my nostrils as I stepped into my grandmother's old house. It had always felt like a place shrouded in mystery, a repository of family secrets. Today, I was on a mission to sift through the remnants of our family history, driven by an inexplicable urge to know more about the ancestors whose blood ran through my veins. As I climbed the creaking stairs to the attic, my heart raced with anticipation and a hint of trepidation. The attic was a chaotic jumble of forgotten memories. Boxes stacked haphazardly, old furniture covered in white sheets, and countless trinkets that spoke of lives once lived. I began to sort through the boxes, each one revealing a piece of the puzzle that was my family's past. Just as I was about to give in to the monotony of dusty knickknacks, something caught my eye. It was a large, ornate frame, hidden beneath a tattered quilt. I pulled it out, my curiosity piqued. As I wiped the dust away, the image revealed itself. A portrait of a man from a bygone era. My breath caught in my throat. He looked exactly like me. Same dark hair, same piercing blue eyes, but the expression on his face was one of sheer terror. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if he was trying to convey a warning from beyond the grave. What could possibly have frightened him so? I leaned closer, examining the details of the painting. Felt wrong, almost alive. The longer I stared, the more I felt an inexplicable connection to this man. I had to know who he was and why he looked so terrified. I quickly descended the stairs, my mind racing with questions. I felt as if I had stumbled onto something significant, something that demanded my attention. What lay behind those haunted eyes? I grabbed my jacket and headed straight for the local library, determined to uncover the truth about my lineage. The library was a quaint building filled with the scent of old paper and leather-bound books. I made my way to the genealogy section, a treasure trove of information for someone like me, desperate to piece together the fragments of my family's past. Hours passed as I pored over dusty tomes, until I stumbled upon a collection of diaries penned by my great-grandmother. The leather cover was cracked, and as I opened it, the musty scent of history wafted out, enveloping me. As I flipped through the pages, I found entries that spoke of strange rituals and an ominous entity that had haunted our family for generations. My heart pounded as I read about the entity that fed on fear and despair, lurking in the shadows of our lineage. It seemed to thrive on the tragedies that had befallen us. The words leapt off the page, igniting a fire of dread within me. I frantically searched for any mention of how to banish this dark presence, but the pages only offered cryptic clues, failing to provide any clear answers. Feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach, I decided I needed to talk to someone about what I had discovered. My cousin Sarah had always been attuned to the supernatural, her sensitivity to the unseen world often leading to strange occurrences. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, urgency creeping into my voice as she answered. "Sarah, it's Mark. I found something about our family. You need to meet me at the cafe, like now. Is everything okay?" she asked, a note of concern evident in her tone. "No, I don't think it is. Just, please come quickly." When Sarah arrived, her expression was serious. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes searching mine for answers. I took a deep breath, eager to share my findings, but the weight of my revelations made it hard to begin. "I found an old portrait of an ancestor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He looks just like me, but his face, it's filled with terror." Sarah's brow furrowed, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. And I found these diaries," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper. "They talk about some kind of entity that has haunted our family for generations. Thrives on fear, Sarah. I think it's been feeding off our lineage." Her eyes widened. "That's not good. Ever since you started digging into your family history, I felt a dark presence around me. It's like something is watching us." "Watching us?" I echoed, a chill creeping up my spine. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's just a feeling, but I think we need to do something before it gets worse." As she spoke, I felt a strange urge to act. The air around us seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "What can we do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. "I have a crystal that I use to communicate with spirits. Maybe I can reach out and find out more about this entity," she suggested, her determination shining through her initial fear. "Do you really think that will work?" I asked, skepticism creeping in. "It's worth a shot," she replied, her voice firm. "But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." I nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of urgency. We needed to act quickly. "Let's go to your place. We can try to do this there." Arriving at Sarah's house, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in on us. She retrieved the crystal from her collection of spiritual objects and set it on the table between us. "Okay, just focus on the energy around us," she instructed, closing her eyes. I watched her intently, a mix of skepticism and hope swirling within me. As she whispered incantations, I could feel the air shift, a subtle vibration that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the candle we had lit. Sarah gasped, her eyes snapping open. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice shaky. Before I could respond, a pulse of energy surged through the room, and Sarah collapsed, her body going limp. I rushed to her side, panic rising in my chest. "Sarah, wake up!" I shook her gently, my heart racing. After what felt like an eternity, her eyes fluttered open, and she gasped for air. "Mark, it's worse than I thought," she said, her voice trembling. "The entity, it's coming for us. We need to act fast." "What do we do?" I asked, urgency flooding my words. "We need to gather more information. We can't let it win," she said, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "But we have to be prepared for anything." As the weight of our situation settled over us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just brushed the surface of something far more sinister than we could have ever anticipated. The shadows loomed larger, and the whispers of our ancestors grew louder, urging us to uncover the truth before it was too late. The air was thick with dust as I stepped into my grandmother's old house, a place that had always held an air of mystery and nostalgia. The floor creaked under my weight, reminding me of childhood visits filled with stories of the past. I had come to sort through some belongings, but I never anticipated what I would uncover in the attic. As I climbed the narrow staircase, I felt a shiver run down my spine, an instinctual unease that settled in my gut. The attic was dimly lit, cluttered with boxes and forgotten treasures. I began sifting through the stacks, memories swirling around me like the dust motes in the air. It was then that I stumbled upon an old, ornate frame, almost hidden beneath a pile of tattered blankets. With careful hands, I brushed off the dust, revealing a portrait that made my breath hitch in my throat. The man in the painting was strikingly familiar, with features so similar to mine that it was as if I were staring into a mirror. Yet, there was something unsettling about his expression. His eyes were wide with terror, and his mouth seemed to form a silent scream. I felt an inexplicable connection to this ancestor, a deep unease that stirred in my chest. Why did he look so afraid? What had he experienced that marked his face with such dread? As I studied the painting, a sense of foreboding washed over me. I could not shake the feeling that there was more to this portrait than mere resemblance. I needed to know who he was and what had happened to him. With that thought, I made up my mind to delve deeper into my family's history, unaware that it would lead me down a dark and treacherous path. The following days were consumed by research. I found myself in the local library, poring over dusty tomes and newspapers, desperately searching for any mention of my family. It was there, tucked between the pages of a forgotten book, that I discovered the diaries of my great-grandmother. The yellowed pages spoke of rituals that sent shivers down my spine, strange ceremonies that seemed to beckon the unknown. An entity, she wrote, had haunted our family for generations, feeding off fear and despair. Each word I read only intensified my curiosity, but it also ignited a flame of fear within me. The entries detailed tragic events that had befallen my ancestors, and it was clear that this entity was linked to them in a way that I could not yet comprehend. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I read about their encounters with this dark force, and I knew I couldn't face it alone. That was when I decided to reach out to Sarah. Sarah had always been different, attuned to the supernatural in ways I could never understand. We met at a small cafe, its warm lighting contrasting sharply with the chill that had settled in my bones. Over steaming cups of coffee, I shared my findings, watching her furrowed brow deepen with concern. "Mark, this isn't just some family history project," she said, her voice low and intense. "You're messing with forces you don't fully understand." "I know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I can't just ignore it. There's something in our blood that needs to be confronted." She looked away, biting her lip, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "Since you started this search, I felt a presence. It's like something is watching us. I don't like it, Mark. Then we need to do something about it. We can't let this entity continue to feed off our family's fear," I urged, feeling a determination rising within me. Sarah nodded slowly, and I felt a spark of hope. "Okay, let's try to reach out to the spirits. Maybe we can get answers." We arranged to meet again, this time at her apartment. She had brought a crystal, something she claimed could facilitate communication with the other side. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and as Sarah began to chant softly, I could feel the air shift around us. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, she gasped, her eyes rolling back as a wave of energy surged through her. "Sarah!" I shouted, rushing to her side as she collapsed to the floor. Panic gripped my heart. What had I done? I felt helpless as I cradled her head in my lap, whispering her name, fear pooling in my stomach. After what felt like an eternity, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mark, it's worse than I thought," she murmured, her voice shaky. "The entity is close. We need to act fast." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I could feel the heaviness of the situation pressing down on me. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find out more about these rituals. There has to be something in those diaries that can help us. We both knew we needed reinforcements. I called Jake, a friend who had always been open-minded about the supernatural. When he arrived, I could see the concern etched on his face as he took in our somber expressions. "What happened?" he asked, glancing between us. "Something happened to Sarah while we were trying to contact the spirits," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to investigate further. There may be items in my grandmother's house that could help us." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "Let's do it. We can't let whatever this is gain power over us." We made our way back to my grandmother's house, the air thick with tension. As we entered, the familiar creaks of the old structure greeted us, but they felt different this time, more ominous. We headed straight for the attic, where I had first uncovered the portrait. As we rifled through boxes, we unearthed a small, ornate box hidden beneath a pile of old linens. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing items that sent chills down my spine. Candles, strange symbols, and what appeared to be voodoo dolls. "What the hell is this?" Jake muttered, picking up one of the dolls. "I think these are connected to the rituals mentioned in the diaries," I said, glancing at Sarah, who looked equally unsettled. "Mark, be careful with that," she warned, her voice tinged with anxiety. "These objects could hold a lot of power." I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. As I reached out to touch one of the candles, an icy wave of fear washed over me, causing me to pull my hand back abruptly. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, and I turned to see Sarah and Jake staring at me, their faces pale. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Yeah," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "What was it?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. "But I think we need to leave this place. Feels wrong." "Agreed," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We need to regroup and figure out our next steps." As we descended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the entity was lurking just beyond our sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension among us was palpable, each of us grappling with our own fears and the unknown that lay ahead. We knew we had to confront whatever darkness was tied to our family, but the weight of our discovery felt heavier than ever. The days following my discoveries in the attic were a whirlwind of emotions. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread as I delved deeper into the secrets of my family. The portrait of my ancestor haunted my thoughts. Each time I closed my eyes, I could see that face twisted in terror, a reflection of the fear that seemed to seep through the very walls of my grandmother's old house. I had to know more. I spent hours in the local library, poring over dusty tomes and yellowed pages. It was in one of those forgotten corners that I stumbled upon the diaries of my great-grandmother. The fragile paper spoke of strange rituals and an entity that had plagued my family for generations. The words leaped off the page, each sentence thick with the weight of the past. Rituals of protection, binding and banishing. I whispered to myself, flipping through the pages feverishly. Each entry detailed a heartbreaking tragedy, a death, or a disappearance that seemed to coincide with the appearance of this entity. It was described as a creature that thrived on fear, feeding off the anguish of those it tormented. My hands trembled as I traced over the faded ink, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "What does this mean?" I mumbled, more to myself than anyone else. The librarian shot me a concerned glance from across the room, and I quickly turned my attention back to the diary. The pages were riddled with warnings but offered little guidance on how to rid ourselves of this malevolent force. The more I read, the more I felt a sense of urgency swell within me. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to reach out to my cousin Sarah. She had always had a knack for the supernatural, and I needed her insight. I found her at our usual cafe, a cozy spot that smelled of fresh coffee and pastries. She looked up from her drink as I slid into the chair across from her. "Hey, Mark, what's going on?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. "You won't believe what I found in the attic. A portrait of an ancestor, but his expression, Sarah, it's terrifying." And I found these diaries that talk about some dark entity that's haunted our family for generations. Her brow furrowed, and she leaned in closer. I felt something too, Mark. Since you started digging into our family history, I've sensed a presence. It's been unsettling. Exactly. I think we need to do something about it. Maybe you can help me connect with the spirits, I suggested, my voice tinged with desperation. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. I can try, but it's risky. We need to be careful. I have this crystal that might help us, she said, pulling a small, shimmering stone from her bag. But if the entity is as strong as you say, we might not be prepared for what we encounter. Anything is better than sitting around doing nothing, I urged, my determination pushing through the creeping anxiety. Let's do it. Later that evening, we gathered in my living room, the atmosphere thick with tension. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on us as Sarah held the crystal in her hands, her eyes closed in concentration. I'll try to reach out to our ancestors. Just stay quiet and focus on the energy in the room, she instructed. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. As she began to chant softly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and an uneasy stillness enveloped us. I glanced at Jake, who had joined us for support. He looked just as anxious as I felt. Suddenly, Sarah gasped, her eyes snapping open. Mark, there's something here, she exclaimed, her voice laced with fear. Before I could respond, she stiffened, her body going rigid. No, please, she cried out, and then she collapsed, the crystal slipping from her fingers and rolling across the floor. Sarah, I rushed to her side, shaking her gently. Wake up. What happened? It felt like an eternity before she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. I saw something. It was dark and it was angry. It's coming closer, Mark. We need to act fast. Her voice was shaky, and I could see the fear etched on her face. What do we do? I asked, panic rising within me. We need to find out more about the rituals mentioned in the diaries. There has to be a way to protect ourselves, she replied, her eyes wide with determination. The next few days were a blur of frantic research and late-night discussions. We invited Jake to join us, knowing that strength came in numbers. As we sat huddled around my dining table, the atmosphere felt thick with apprehension. We pieced together fragments of information, trying to make sense of what lay ahead. Mark, look at this, Jake said, pointing to a passage in one of the diaries. It mentions a box hidden in the house. It could contain items related to the rituals. If we can find it, maybe we can use them to protect ourselves. My heart raced at the thought. Let's go back to the house. We need to search every inch of that place until we find it. When we arrived at my grandmother's home, the air felt charged with anticipation. We scoured the nooks and crannies, our footsteps echoing in the silence. Finally, in a forgotten corner of the attic, we stumbled upon a dusty old box, its lid barely hanging on. Here it is, I exclaimed, my fingers trembling with excitement as I opened it. Inside, we found an assortment of items, old candles, strange symbols, and what appeared to be voodoo dolls. My heart sank as I picked up one of the dolls, its features eerily familiar. Mark, be careful, Sarah warned, her eyes wide with concern. We don't know what these things are connected to. As I touched the objects, an overwhelming wave of fear washed over me. I recoiled, and suddenly, a dark shadow flickered past us. We exchanged terrified glances, the fear palpable in the air. Did you see that? Jake whispered, his voice barely above a breath. What was that? I don't know, but we need to figure this out. Fast, I said, trying to steady my voice. The tension in the room had escalated, and it felt like we were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering dangerously close to the unknown. That night, as I lay in bed, sleep evaded me. The face of the ancestor from the portrait loomed in my mind, his expression twisted in horror. I tossed and turned, caught in a web of nightmares. In one of those dreams, I was standing in a dark, foggy landscape, And there it was, the entity shrouded in shadows, its presence overwhelming. "Don't continue this," it whispered, its voice echoing through my mind. "You don't know what you're dealing with." I woke up gasping, my body drenched in sweat. The room was suffocatingly quiet, and I could feel the weight of dread pressing down on me. My heart raced as I glanced toward the portrait hanging on the wall. To my horror, it was turned upside down. What does this mean? I thought, a chill running down my spine. It felt like a warning, a sign that something malignant was trying to communicate with me. I knew I had to confront this entity, but the fear clung to me like a second skin. The connection to my ancestor was undeniable, and I felt an urgency to understand what had happened in the past. I had to unravel the truth behind that portrait and the terror that seemed to echo through my bloodline. As the sun began to rise, I steeled myself for the challenges that lay ahead. The shadows of my family's history were closing in, and I realized that to break free from this cycle of fear, I would have to confront not just the entity, but the darkness that had haunted my family for generations. It was a quiet evening when Sarah, Jake, and I gathered in the dimly lit living room of my grandmother's house, the air thick with an unsettling tension. The shadows danced along the walls, flickering with the light of the candles we had lit in our desperate attempt to ward off whatever malevolent force was lurking in the corners of our family history. The discovery of that hidden box in the attic, filled with ritualistic items, had changed everything. I could feel the weight of our lineage pressing down on us, a collective burden we could no longer ignore. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with concern etched across his features, his fingers nervously drumming on the table. "What if we're just making things worse?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my own fear at bay. "We have to try, Jake. If what we found in those diaries is true, we can't just sit back and let this entity take control of our lives. We have to confront it." Sarah, who had been staring at the box of items we had unearthed, suddenly spoke up, her voice trembling. "I can feel it, you know? The energy in this room. It's different, like something is watching us." She glanced around, as if expecting the very shadows to spring to life. "We need to do this right. Then let's get started," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I reached for the box, lifting the lid to reveal the contents inside. There were candles, each marked with strange symbols, small, hand-carved figurines that resembled dolls, and a crumbling piece of parchment that had clearly seen better days. "What's this?" Jake leaned in closer, trying to decipher the faded text. "Looks like some kind of incantation. Maybe it's instructions for the ritual," I suggested, my heart racing. "We need to follow the steps exactly. If these items were used to bind the entity, they could also help us banish it." "Let's start with the candles," Sarah said, her voice steadier now. "We need to create a circle of protection." We quickly arranged the candles in a wide circle on the floor, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something sinister was lurking just beyond our sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Once the candles were set up, we sat down in the center of the circle, our backs to each other. I could feel the warmth of Sarah's presence to my left and Jake's to my right, a fragile comfort amidst the growing dread. "Okay, let's focus," I said, trying to center myself. "We need to channel our energy and intent into this ritual. Whatever is haunting us, we need to confront it." "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide, reflecting the flickering candlelight. "Once we start, there's no turning back." "Yeah," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's do this." We began to chant the words from the parchment, our voices blending into a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very floor beneath us. As we spoke the incantation, the air around us grew heavier, charged with an energy that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "Mark," Sarah said suddenly, her voice rising in panic. "I can feel it. Something's happening." I closed my eyes, trying to concentrate, but a shiver ran down my spine. A cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing a few of the candles, and I could hear a low whispering that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. What is that? Jake asked, his voice trembling. Do you hear it? It's the entity, I replied, trying to keep my fear in check. We need to keep going. But as we continued to chant, the whispering grew louder, more insistent, like a cacophony of voices pressing in on us. I could feel the shadows deepening, swirling around the room, and I instinctively reached for Sarah's hand. Stay with me, I murmured, squeezing her hand tightly. We can do this. Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind blew through the room, knocking over one of the candles. The flame flickered violently before extinguishing completely, plunging us into darkness. My heart raced as the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in the air. Mark! Sarah cried out, her voice echoing in the void. What's happening? Keep going, I shouted, desperation fueling my words. We have to finish the ritual. Just as I shouted, I felt a powerful surge of energy ripple through the room. It knocked me backward, and I fell hard onto the wooden floor. The air felt electric, buzzing with an intensity that was both frightening and exhilarating. I could sense a presence looming over us, something dark and ancient, and I could almost hear its thoughts, filled with pain and rage. Mark! Jake yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. Get up! We have to finish. I struggled to my feet, my heart pounding. We can't stop now, I gasped, brushing the dust off my clothes. We're so close. As we resumed the chant, I felt an overwhelming wave of fear wash over me. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, forming shapes that danced just beyond the edges of my vision. I caught a glimpse of something, a figure, indistinct but familiar, hovering at the edge of the circle, and I felt a visceral jolt of terror. Mark, look, Sarah shouted, pointing. It's right there. I squinted into the darkness, my stomach twisting in knots. There it was, a shadowy figure that resembled the man in the portrait I had found in the attic. The resemblance was uncanny. The same haggard features, the same terrified expression. My breath caught in my throat. Who are you? I shouted, my voice trembling. What do you want? The figure didn't respond, but I could feel its energy pressing in on us, suffocating and oppressive. It was as though the entity was feeding off our fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Mark, focus, Jake yelled, snapping me back to reality. The ritual. I shook my head, forcing myself to concentrate. Right, we need to. But before I could finish, the lights flickered wildly, and a deafening roar filled the room. The sound was raw and primal, shaking the very foundations of the house. The candles flickered violently, and I could see the figure becoming more defined, more menacing. Keep chanting, Sarah urged, her voice barely audible over the din. We pushed forward, our voices rising in a desperate crescendo. I felt the energy in the room shift, and the shadows began to recede, the figure waning as our determination grew stronger. With one final push, we shouted the last line of the incantation, and a blinding light erupted from the candles, illuminating the room and casting the shadows away. For a moment, everything was silent, the air still and charged with a palpable tension. But then, the figure let out an anguished scream, a sound that pierced through the silence like a knife. It thrashed against the light, and I could see the pain etched on its face, mirroring the terror I had seen in the portrait. Mark, it's working, Jake shouted, his voice filled with exhilaration. Don't stop. Finish it, Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. We're almost there. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. We are not afraid, I yelled, channeling all the strength I could muster. We break this cycle. The figure writhed in agony, its form twisting and changing, and I felt a surge of power coursing through me. The light intensified, and for a split second, I could see the truth. The entity was a manifestation of all the fear and pain my family had endured for generations, feeding off our darkest secrets and regrets. Let it go, I screamed, my voice ringing out with a force I didn't know I had. You have no power over us anymore. With one final, desperate cry, the figure dissolved into the light, leaving behind a silence that felt both heavy and liberating. The candles flickered one last time before extinguishing, plunging us back into darkness. As the adrenaline subsided, I collapsed to my knees, panting heavily. Did we do it? I gasped, looking at Sarah and Jake, who were both equally breathless. I don't know, Sarah replied, her voice shaky, but it feels different now. Jake nodded, his eyes wide with disbelief, like a weight has been lifted. I looked around the room, the shadows now retreating to the corners, no longer threatening. A sense of calm began to settle in, though I could still feel the remnants of fear lingering in the air. Whatever it was, it's gone, I said, a sense of relief washing over me. We faced it together, and we broke the cycle. But even as I spoke those words, a small part of me wondered if we had truly banished the darkness, or if it was merely waiting for another opportunity to strike. With a shiver running down my spine, I knew that while we may have won this battle, the war against our family's past was far from over. The old house creaked around me, each sound echoing my mounting anxiety as I rifled through the contents of the attic. The air was thick with dust, and the musty smell of forgotten memories filled my lungs. I could still feel the weight of Sarah's warning from earlier. The entity was closing in, and we were running out of time. My heart raced as I thumbed through boxes filled with trinkets from generations past, my mind still spinning from everything we had uncovered. Mark, over here, Jake called out from the far corner of the attic, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I turned to see him kneeling next to an old chest, his fingers tracing over the intricate carvings on the lid. What did you find? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the unease gnawing at my insides. I think this might be it, he said, lifting the lid with a creak that echoed ominously in the silence. Inside, there were various objects wrapped in faded cloth. As he pulled one out, I recognized it immediately. A candle, blackened and twisted, possibly used in some dark ritual. Do you think these are the items from the diaries? I wondered aloud, stepping closer to inspect. Could be, Jake replied, his brows furrowed in concentration. We need to be careful, though. If these are connected to that entity... Yeah, I know, I interrupted, the memory of Sarah's fainting spell still fresh in my mind. The energy that had surged through her when she tried to connect with our ancestors had been palpable, and it felt like a warning. As we sifted through the chest, we uncovered more candles, a small dagger, and a handful of peculiar-looking dolls made of cloth and twine. My stomach twisted as I recognized them from the drawings in my great-grandmother's diary. Objects meant to channel energy, to manipulate fate. Mark, do you feel that? Jake suddenly asked, his voice a whisper. I paused, my fingers hovering over a particularly ominous-looking doll, and the air thickened around us. An icy shiver crept down my spine. Feel what? The air... It's different, he murmured, his eyes darting around the dimly lit attic. Before I could respond, a shadow passed through the corner of my vision, and I whipped my head around, heart pounding. Did you see that? Jake nodded slowly, fear creeping into his expression. We should get out of here, he suggested, but I felt paralyzed, rooted in place by a mix of curiosity and dread. Wait, I said. What if there's something here that can help us? We need to understand what we're dealing with. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but then he froze, his eyes wide. Mark, look. I turned back to the chest, and my breath hitched. The candle I had been examining flickered, though there was no draft in the attic. The flame danced wildly, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch toward us. Something's wrong, I said, backing away slowly. As if in response, the shadows converged, swirling together to form a dark mass that hovered just beyond our reach. I could feel terror clawing at my insides. We need to leave. But as I turned to grab Jake's arm, I felt a cold grip around my ankle. I looked down, panic rising as I saw a shadowy tendril snaking its way up my leg. Jake! I yelled, trying to pull away. Hold on! He shouted, lunging toward me. He gripped my arm just as the shadow tightened its hold, and for a moment, we were both yanked backward, teetering on the edge of falling into the chest. "Let go!" I cried, trying to shake off the icy grip. "It's pulling me in." With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked myself free from Jake's grasp and stumbled backward, falling onto the floor as the shadows released me. I looked up just in time to see the dark mass dissipate, but the air felt charged with a lingering malevolence. "What the hell was that?" Jake gasped, his face pale as he scrambled to his feet. "Did you see it? It was alive." "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing, "but we need to find a way to banish it. If these objects are tied to it, maybe they can help." "Help us how?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Those things looked like they were meant for rituals, Mark. We have no idea what we're doing." I swallowed hard, thoughts racing. "We have to take them to Sarah. She might know how to use them. She's connected to this, whatever it is." "Okay." Jake nodded, still looking shaken. "But let's hurry. I don't want to stick around here any longer than we have to." With the contents of the chest hastily piled in our arms, we made our way out of the attic, the air growing heavier with each step. The shadows seemed to linger just out of sight, and I could feel their eyes on us, watching, waiting. As we descended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that whatever force we had disturbed was not ready to let us go. "Do you think it knows we have the items?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Probably," Jake replied, glancing over his shoulder. "We need to keep moving." We burst into the living room, where Sarah was pacing, her face drawn and anxious. "What took you so long?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "We found some things in the attic," I said, breathless, "but we think we might have awakened something. It felt like it was alive." Her face paled, and she stepped back, her eyes flicking toward the items we carried. "What did you find?" Jake and I laid the contents of the chest on the coffee table, and I could see Sarah's expression shift from concern to horror as she recognized the objects. "These are ritual items," she breathed. "You shouldn't have touched them." "Well, we didn't have much choice," I shot back, frustration bubbling over. "We're trying to stop whatever is haunting us. We need your help." Sarah bit her lip, glancing at the objects with a mix of fear and determination. Okay, we can try to use these to perform a banishment ritual, but I need to know exactly what you felt. What happened?" I exchanged a glance with Jake, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "When we touched the items, I felt terror, like something was reaching out to us. It felt almost sentient." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "That's not good. If it's aware, it can retaliate. We need to act quickly." "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice shaky but resolute. "We'll need to prepare," Sarah said, her voice firm as she began to gather the items. "Find a safe space and set them up in a circle. We'll need to create a barrier to protect ourselves during the ritual." As we worked together, I could feel the tension in the room mounting. The shadows seemed to thicken, pressing in on us from all sides. I could almost hear whispers, words too faint to understand, but they sent chills down my spine. "Mark," Sarah said, breaking my concentration, "I need you to stay focused. This is not just a simple incantation. We're dealing with something powerful." "I know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I keep thinking about my ancestor. What if he's the reason this all started?" "We'll figure it out," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "But right now, we need to concentrate on the ritual. Everything else can wait." With the items arranged in a circle, we took a deep breath and joined hands, our hearts racing. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, glancing between us. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Let's do this." With that, she began to chant, her voice steady and clear, the words flowing from her lips like a river of ancient power. As she spoke, I felt the air shift, a palpable energy swirling around us. But then, just as the ritual began to take shape, the shadows surged forward, wrapping around us like a shroud. My heart raced as the whispers grew louder, echoing the secrets of our family, the pain and fear that had haunted us for generations. "Stay strong," Sarah urged, her voice rising above the chaos. We can do this. As the shadows writhed and pulsed, I felt a surge of energy rush through me, like a wave crashing against the shore. The darkness pressed in, but I refused to back down. I focused on Sarah's voice, on the light that flickered around us, and I summoned every ounce of courage I had within me. Face it, Mark, Jake shouted, his grip tightening around my hand. You're not alone. With those words, I felt a spark ignite within me. I was not just a descendant of a cursed lineage. I was part of a legacy that could fight back. We could break the chains that had bound us for so long. And as the shadows clawed at the edges of our circle, I knew we had to face the darkness together. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a restless spirit, but inside the dimly lit room, a different kind of turmoil brewed within me. It had been weeks since I stumbled upon the portrait of my ancestor, weeks since I had felt the heavy weight of our family's dark legacy pressing down on my shoulders. Now, as I lay in bed, the shadows danced on the walls, twisting and contorting into shapes that made my heart race. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for me. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. A chill crept through the space, and I could swear I heard a whispering voice calling my name. Mark, Mark. It echoed faintly, and I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. The storm outside roared louder, but it was the voice that held my attention, compelling me to listen. As I strained to hear, I felt a tug at my consciousness, pulling me deeper into a vision. The room around me faded, and I found myself standing in a dark, misty expanse. Before me, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, his face obscured by a veil of darkness, but something about him felt familiar. I squinted, trying to see him clearly. Mark, he said, his voice resonating with authority and sorrow. You must listen to me. Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. I am your ancestor, he replied, stepping closer. I am the one whose portrait you found, the one who has been haunting your family for generations. You seek to understand the entity that plagues your lineage, but first you must confront what I have done. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. The terror etched in his features in that portrait wasn't just a reflection of fear. It was a warning. What do you mean? What did you do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of his presence pressing down on me. He sighed deeply, and the shadows around him seemed to swirl in response. Long ago, I sought power and protection for our family. I delved into dark rituals, hoping to bend the forces of the universe to my will. But in my hubris, I made a grave mistake. I summoned an entity, thinking I could control it. Instead, I unleashed a horror that has fed on our family's fear ever since. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. But how do I stop it? How do I break this cycle? You must confront the truth of my actions, he urged. Only then can you free yourself and the generations that will follow. The entity is bound to my mistakes, to the fear I created. You are the key to breaking this curse, but you must understand the past fully. As the storm raged on, the darkness around us flickered, and I saw flashes of memories, fragments of rituals gone wrong, screams echoing in the night, shadows swirling around figures huddled together in fear. I recoiled at the images, realizing how deep the roots of this malevolence ran. I don't want to repeat your mistakes, I said, my voice shaking. Then you must learn from them, he replied, his gaze piercing through the mist. Face the truth of what happened that fateful night, the betrayal that gave birth to this entity. Only by confronting the darkness can you hope to overcome it. Where do I start? I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. Go to the place where it all began, he instructed, his voice growing fainter. The site of the ritual. There you will find the answers you seek. But be warned, your fear will be your greatest adversary. It is what the entity feeds upon. Wait, don't go, I cried out, but the figure began to dissolve into the shadows, leaving me with a sense of urgency and dread. I awoke in my bed, drenched in sweat, the storm still raging outside. My heart raced as I processed the vision. Felt so real, so vivid. The message was clear. I had to face the past, confront the site of the original ritual. The next morning, I gathered my courage and called Sarah. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "I had a vision about my ancestor. He told me I needed to go to the site of the ritual." "Mark, that sounds dangerous," she replied, concern lacing her voice. "Are you sure it's a good idea? What if the entity tries to stop you?" "I have to do this," I insisted. "I can't keep running from it. I need to know the truth." "Okay," she relented. "I'll go with you. Just promise me you'll be careful." Later that day, we met at the cafe, where we huddled over a table, discussing our next steps. "Do you have any idea where this place is?" Sarah asked. "I think it's an old clearing in the woods behind my grandmother's house," I said, recalling the details from the diaries. "We'll have to search for it. Let's go tonight, then." Her determination mirrored my own, and I felt a flicker of hope that together we could confront this darkness. As night fell, we made our way to the woods, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with unease. With each step, I felt the weight of my ancestors' words pressing down on me. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, glancing nervously around us. "We're already here," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We need to see this through." We trudged deeper into the woods, the moon casting an eerie glow through the branches. Finally, we stumbled upon a clearing, overgrown and wild. In the center stood a circle of stones, worn and weathered, remnants of the past. My heart raced as I approached the stones, a sense of dread washing over me. "This must be it," I said, awe and fear mingling in my chest. I could almost feel the echoes of the rituals that had taken place here. As I touched one of the stones, a jolt of energy surged through me, and I gasped, stumbling back. "Mark!" Sarah exclaimed, rushing to my side. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I managed to say, though my heart was racing. "But I can feel it. The energy, the fear. It's all here." "Maybe we should leave," she suggested, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "This place feels wrong." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We have to uncover what happened here. It's the only way to put an end to this." As I gathered my resolve, the wind picked up, swirling around us, and I felt an oppressive presence. "We're not alone," I murmured, dread creeping back into my bones. "Mark, let's go," Sarah urged, her voice trembling, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, the stones seeming to hum with energy. "I need to understand," I whispered, my breath hitching in my throat. "I need to confront it." Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a shadow rushed past us. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness. It was a silhouette, indistinct but menacing, and my heart pounded as I faced the embodiment of my fears. "Mark," it hissed, the voice echoing with malice. "You should not have come here. Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of terror. "I am the manifestation of your family's fears, the consequence of your ancestors' mistakes," it replied, the shadows writhing around it. "You cannot escape your destiny." "No," I cried, my voice rising. "I will not let fear control me. I will face you." The entity laughed, a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you can confront me? You are just as weak as the ones before you." In that moment, I remembered the words of my ancestor. Fear is what strengthens it. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in determination. "I refuse to be afraid of you." As I said the words, a surge of strength filled me. The shadows flickered, and I could see the entity wavering. "You think you can break the cycle?" it sneered. "Yes," I declared, my voice steady. "I will uncover the truth, and I will not let the mistakes of the past bind me." The shadows around the entity twisted violently, and I felt the wind whip around us. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark, we need to go. It's too powerful." But I couldn't leave. I needed to understand what my ancestor had done, to confront the very essence of the fear that had plagued our family for generations. "Stay with me, Sarah," I urged, my resolve unyielding. "We can face this together." As the entity roared, the shadows surged forward, and I braced myself for the onslaught, knowing that the true battle lay not just in confronting the entity, but in confronting the darkness within my own family's history. The rain poured heavily as I drove through the winding roads leading to the site of the old rituals. My heart raced with each passing mile, a mix of fear and determination swirling within me. Sarah and Jake sat in the back seat, their faces reflecting the same anxiety that gripped me. We had come too far to turn back now. The entity had haunted us long enough, and I was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain hitting the windshield. "What if it's a trap?" I glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting his worried eyes. "We have to know what happened. This is the last piece of the puzzle. We can't let fear dictate our actions anymore." My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through. "We need to break this cycle." Sarah shifted in her seat, her fingers nervously playing with the crystal necklace hanging around her neck. "I can feel it, Mark. There's something dark out there, something waiting for us." Her voice trembled, but she held my gaze with a fierce intensity. "But I believe we can face it together." As we approached the clearing where the rituals had taken place, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick, electric, almost suffocating. I parked the car and we stepped out, the rain still pounding down, turning the ground beneath us into a muddy mess. The remnants of the old site loomed before us, half hidden by overgrown weeds and tangled branches. It was unsettling to think that this was where my family had once sought power and protection, only to unleash a darkness that had plagued us for generations. "Look," I pointed toward a clearing in the trees. "That must be where they performed the rituals." My voice wavered as I stepped forward, the weight of my lineage pressing down on me. As we made our way through the underbrush, I could feel the weight of history bearing down on us. Memories of the past whispered through the trees, echoing the cries of anguish and desperation from those who had come before me. I shivered as I thought of the entity that had haunted my family, a creature born of fear and darkness. "Do you think we'll find anything useful?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If we can uncover the truth behind the rituals, we might find a way to banish it for good." We reached the clearing and stood in silence, taking in the remnants of what had once been a sacred space. In the middle of the clearing lay a stone altar, weathered and cracked, the surface stained with what looked like old blood. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the memories of the past flooded my mind. "Let's search for anything that might help us," I said, trying to shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach. We began to scour the area, brushing aside leaves and debris, hoping to find something that would shed light on the dark history of my family. After a few minutes of searching, Sarah called out, her voice echoing through the trees. "Mark, over here." I rushed over to where she stood, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. "What did you find?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She pointed to a small, weather-worn diary half buried in the mud. I carefully pulled it out, wiping off the dirt to reveal its fragile cover. The initials EM were inscribed on the front, my heart racing as I realized it belonged to my great-grandmother. "Open it," Jake urged, leaning in closer. With trembling hands, I flipped the pages, the smell of damp paper filling the air. The entries were scrawled in an elegant cursive, but the words became increasingly erratic as I read. My eyes darted across the page, catching phrases like "the entity," "the ritual," and "betrayal." My heart sank as I read about the dark pact made generations ago, a desperate attempt to gain control over the forces of nature and protect the family from harm. "Listen to this," I said, my voice steadying as I read aloud. "The rituals must be performed under the blood moon, and one must bring forth their deepest fears to confront the entity. It thrives on terror, feeding off the pain of past generations." Sarah shivered beside me. That's exactly what we've been experiencing. It's been feeding off us, our fear, our pain. Wait, there's more, I continued, flipping to the next page. It mentions a betrayal, an act that allowed the entity to gain strength. It says here, I paused, my heart racing. The betrayal came from within, someone close to the family. What does that mean? Jake asked, his brow furrowing. It means that the darkness within my family runs deeper than I thought. It's not just a curse. It's a legacy of betrayal and fear. We need to get to the bottom of this. As I continued to read, the rain intensified, drumming against the trees above us. There's a passage that describes a specific ritual to confront the entity and break the cycle. It says that the one confronting it must face the truth of their ancestors. My voice faltered. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. We can do this, Sarah said firmly. We're in this together. You're not alone, Mark. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the clearing, causing the trees to creak ominously. I glanced around, feeling the presence of something lurking just beyond our sight. It sent a shiver down my spine. Did you feel that? I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. Yes, Jake replied, his face pale. It's here, isn't it? I nodded, my heart pounding. We need to hurry. Let's finish searching for any other clues. We continued to scavenge the area, but the oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to focus. I could sense the entity's energy, coiling around us like a serpent, waiting for the right moment to strike. Mark, Sarah said suddenly, her voice tense. Look over there. She pointed toward a small, overgrown mound on the edge of the clearing. I walked over, brushing aside the foliage to reveal a small wooden box, intricately carved with strange symbols. What is this? I murmured, lifting it from its resting place. Open it, Jake urged, stepping closer. With a deep breath, I slowly opened the box, revealing various ritualistic items. Dried herbs, a small dagger, and a piece of parchment. My hands trembled as I reached for the parchment, unfolding it to reveal a detailed account of the last ritual performed by my ancestors. This could be it, I stammered, scanning the text. It describes how to summon the entity and confront it, but it also warns of the consequences. Consequences, Jake repeated, an edge of fear creeping into his voice. It says that the ritual can only be performed if the one confronting the entity is willing to sacrifice a part of themselves, something they hold dear. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of my family's history crash down on me. I don't know if I can do that. Mark, you have to, Sarah insisted, her voice steady. You're the only one who can break this cycle. We can't let this entity continue to haunt your family. As I absorbed her words, a realization struck me. The fear that had paralyzed my ancestors for generations was the very thing that had given the entity its power. But I had something they didn't, a choice. We need to gather everything we've found and prepare for the ritual, I said, determination swelling within me. We'll face this together. With newfound resolve, we gathered the items we had uncovered and made our way back to the car. The rain had lightened, and a sense of urgency propelled us forward. As we drove back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, the entity lurking just out of sight, waiting for its moment to strike. Mark, are you okay? Sarah asked, concern etched in her features. Yeah, I'm fine, I replied, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing myself or her. We just need to prepare. We can't let fear control us any longer. Upon returning to my grandmother's house, we spread out the items we had gathered on the living room table. The air felt thick with tension as we examined everything closely. Let's go over the ritual one last time, I suggested, my fingers tracing the lines of the diary. We need to make sure we understand what we're doing. As we meticulously reviewed the instructions, the sense of dread grew heavier. With each passing moment, I could feel the shadows creeping in around us, the entity's presence growing stronger. Are you ready for this? Jake asked quietly, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. No, but we have to be. We don't have any other choice. The storm outside began to rage once more, thunder rumbling ominously as the wind howled against the windows. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't allow myself to falter now. I had come too far to back down. "Let's do this," I said, my voice steady with resolve. As we prepared to confront the darkness that had haunted my family for generations, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. Together, we would face whatever lay ahead, and I would break this cycle once and for all. As shadows danced on the walls of the ruined site where my family had once gathered for rituals, their essence still lingering in the air like a thick fog, my heart raced as I stood there, flanked by Sarah and Jake, the echoes of our frantic breaths filling the eerie silence. The atmosphere was charged with an unsettling energy, and I could feel the weight of generations pressing down on me. The revelation that the entity haunting my family was, in fact, the manifestation of our fears sent a chill down my spine. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that howled outside. "Are you sure about this? We can still turn back." I glanced at her, seeing the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I understood her apprehension. We had faced so much already, but there was no going back now. "We have to do this. It's the only way to end this nightmare. We need to confront it, to confront what happened." Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We can't let it control us anymore. We're stronger than our fear." Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The dark corners of the room felt alive, as if unseen eyes were watching us. I had to find the strength to face what lay ahead. Let's recall everything we learned. The entity feeds on fear, and we've given it too much power for too long. As if in response to my words, the air grew colder, and a figure began to materialize before us. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. The form was shrouded in shadows, an indistinct silhouette that sent waves of dread coursing through my veins. But as it solidified, I felt a jolt of recognition. "Mark!" The voice was hauntingly familiar, echoing like a long-lost memory. "You've come to face me. What are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice shaking as I confronted the figure. "I am the echo of your lineage, the amalgamation of every fear, every regret that has plagued your family. I am the result of your ancestors' reckless desires for power and protection. I am the darkness that has fed on your bloodline for generations." My mind raced as I pieced together the fragments of my family's history, haunted by the portrait that had sparked this entire journey. "You were created by him, weren't you? By my ancestor." I felt a surge of anger rising within me. "He sought power and created you to protect himself, and in doing so, he doomed us all." The entity's form flickered, and I could see the features of a man I had only glimpsed in that old photograph. The same eyes, the same haunted expression. "Yes, and you are the culmination of that legacy. You have the power to either break this cycle or continue the suffering." I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me. "But how? How can I stop you? You thrive on fear, and I've been afraid my entire life." "Fear is a choice, Mark," the entity replied, its voice now a soft whisper, almost soothing. "You must learn to confront it, to embrace it and let it go. Only then can you free yourself and your family from this torment." Taking a step closer, I steadied my breath. "You think I can just let go of my fears? You've haunted me, shown me nightmares, made me doubt everything I believed in. Why should I trust you? Because," it said almost pleadingly, "you are stronger than you realize. You are not defined by the mistakes of your ancestors. You can choose to rewrite your story." "Rewrite my story?" I echoed, the idea swirling in my mind. What if I refuse? What if I let fear control me? The entity's form began to shift again, the shadows coiling around it like smoke. "Then your family will continue to suffer, and I will remain a part of you. You must understand that fear only holds power when it is left unchallenged." I remembered the countless nightmares, the moments of paralyzing fear that had gripped me since I had begun this journey. What if I can't do it? What if I can't break the cycle? "You can," it said, its voice firm now. "You have already begun. You confronted the past, sought out the truth. Now, face your fear. I could feel the energy in the room shifting, swirling around us like a tempest. Every moment spent in terror, every sleepless night flooded back into my mind, and I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, threatening to crush my spirit. But amidst the chaos, a flame of courage ignited within me. Enough! I shouted, my voice slicing through the darkness. I refuse to let you dictate my life any longer. I will not allow the mistakes of my ancestors to bind me. The entity's form flickered violently, shadows writhing as if caught in a storm. You think you can defy me? I am your fear. No! I yelled, feeling a rush of adrenaline surge through my veins. You are a part of me, but you do not define me. I am more than the legacy of fear you represent. With that declaration, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The oppressive weight began to lift, and the shadows around us started to recede. I took a step forward, staring directly into the entity's eyes that mirrored my own. I will not run. I will not hide, I said, my voice steady and resolute. I will confront the truth of my family's past, and I will break this cycle. I will not be a victim anymore. In that moment, the entity began to tremble, its form quaking as if it were struggling against an unseen force. You may think you can break free, but fear is a powerful ally. You will always carry it with you. Maybe, I replied, my heart pounding but my resolve unyielding. But I will not let it control me. I will embrace it, face it, and let it go. You are not my master. The shadows around it convulsed, and to my shock, the figure began to transform. The swirling darkness coalesced into a familiar shape, and I gasped as the figure of my ancestor emerged, his expression one of regret and sorrow. Mark, he said softly, his voice trembling, I never meant for this to happen. I sought to protect my family, but in my desperation, I brought forth this darkness. Why? I asked, the pain of his betrayal cutting deep. Why did you do it? I was afraid, he admitted, his voice breaking, afraid of losing everything. I thought I could control it. I thought I could harness the power to protect you all. But instead, I unleashed a curse that would haunt our bloodline for generations. I felt a wave of empathy wash over me, mingled with anger. You let your fear dictate your actions. You took a path that led to our suffering. Yes, he conceded, his form flickering. And now you stand at the crossroads. You have the power to end this, to break the cycle of fear that has bound us. I am sorry, Mark. I am so sorry. I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling heavily in my heart. Then help me end this once and for all. With a nod of understanding, he extended a hand toward me. You must confront the truth of our past. Acknowledge the pain, the betrayal, and let it go. Only then can we both be free. I reached out, feeling the warmth of his hand envelop mine. Together, then, as we stood there, the shadows began to dissipate around us, the air growing lighter. I felt the fear that had once consumed me begin to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. Thank you, I whispered, my heart swelling with gratitude. I will honor our family, and I will break this curse. In that moment, my ancestor smiled, a look of peace washing over his features. You have the strength, Mark. Embrace your courage. You are the key. And as the shadows melted away, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The entity that had haunted my family for generations was finally losing its grip. I turned to Sarah and Jake, who watched in awe, their expressions shifting from fear to hope. Let's finish this, I said, my voice filled with newfound determination. As we stepped forward together, I knew we would face whatever lay ahead with courage, for we had the power to rewrite our story and break free from the chains of the past. And just like that, the nightmare was ready to end, and a new chapter awaited us, one forged from bravery and hope.